Storytelling. An endless dance with the forces that shape our lives. When things go wrong, we play with story to dispel the powers that threaten to destroy. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we remember the lessons from childhood and the darkness subsides. A family arrives in South Africa for a vacation at the Durban seaside. Mum, Dad and 2 kids, just like the tourist brochures. Except that Michael Durr plans to take home much more than happy snaps. He's combining his holiday with a mission. A mission that involves a former British MI6 spy, stolen billions and a monastery in the green hills of KwaZulu-Natal. I have to be patient listening to his story. He tells it with meticulous detail even though he's on holiday. At its simplest, it's a story about you and me being defrauded of billions. Much of the loot was taken as the old government was leaving. They called it lifeboats, Reserve Bank assistance mainly to the Bancorp group that was later acquired by Absa. But why should a German banker on holiday in Marion Hill care?
My interest as a shareholder is that with this thing we get a real impact to open a case which then is good for the whole country and for the whole citizenry. Because in my view, what I experienced over the last 7 years researching this is that we could have such a great country here with all the resources when you get the money system right, when you get a proper money reform.
A holidaying German banker with a mission is just the start of a story that leads to a walk on the nation's dark side. It's a tale that involves spies, shady deals and stolen billions. And it all started when the old government was up against the wall in the dying days of apartheid in the 80s. South Africa has 2 faces. There's the miracle of the Rainbow Nation, a story we cling to for sanity. But there's another side, far from the magical transition of '94. Like agile street dancers, we weave between these 2 realities. The old government wallowed in a world of middlemen and slush funds to pay for bribes and sanctions busting. Violating the UN arms embargo involved taking billions out of state coffers. It was open season. Money flowed out of the treasury. And even today, the murky secrecy prevails.
I just want to see that they have to open the books. It has to be transparent. We have to clean up the I mean, it's really because there's so much going on which you can't even believe.
Believe it or not, apartheid-style secrecy still haunts us. The multi-million rand Reserve Bank assistance, so-called lifeboats, first given to Absa's predecessor Bancorp and later to Absa, was never repaid. The full impact of the corruption of the former state is outlined in a report compiled by the Institute for Security Studies. But has this detailed account put pressure on the current government to deal with the issue?
I would hope that what it did do was raise public awareness and consciousness about the impact of, or the extent of corruption under apartheid. We're dealing with a powerful bank, probably the most influential bank on the African continent, that is the cash cow of Barclays, one of the most influential banks in the world today. I think there's every reason for people not to want to touch the issue of the lifeboat, never mind the interests that probably are still prevalent within the Reserve Bank itself.
Henny van Vieren is the director of the Institute for Security Studies in Cape Town. The ISS is a respected think tank that provides research and analysis. Human security is their business. They're puzzled that nothing is being done to recover the stolen loot from Absa or their majority shareholder, Barclays.
I was puzzled that it took so long and the country didn't take any action to recover all this money, because, I mean, up to today it must amount to roughly 10 billion rand, which actually Barclays, as the majority shareholder of Absa and the successor of Banco and Volkskas, has to pay into the Reserve Bank. I mean, as the lifeboat was illegal under various investigations, which people can see in the public records, in my view, the claim is there, physically there, and it has also never been taxed as far as I know. Therefore, I mean, it was a whole dodgy deal at the time.
Dodgy deals that cost the taxpayers billions. As a nation, we're still trying to work out the full extent of corruption that became endemic under the old government, a state that rode roughshod over human rights.
That you cannot respect human rights in a context in which corruption is allowed to run rampant, and if there is not proper enforcement machinery to deal with corruption, then impunity takes root. People see that big shots can get away with corruption, and so it filters down right through the system, corroding it all the way, and eventually, as the Roman Empire has demonstrated, the entire system fails.
Wonderful. Well, but if you have a chance.
As a director of an anti-corruption NGO, Advocate Paul Hoffman conducts a vigorous campaign. He has an intriguing story to tell about the stolen billions and a British assets recovery firm, an organisation run by a former operative of the UK's Military Intelligence Section 6, known as MI6.
Well, we'd hardly been going very long when a large brown anonymous envelope arrived with what is called the CIEX report inside it. And there's a fair amount of dynamite in that report. I initially thought it might be a hoax. So I made an effort to get hold of its author, who is a former British spy called Michael Oatley, who has taken an interest in South Africa and was actually given a contract in the New South Africa for his company, CIEX, to look into recovering apartheid-era money that had been misappropriated in the handover process.
I got this letter from South Africa with no name on it or nothing, and what was in there, the content was a CD without anything on it except the Sykes report, which then I naturally had to have a closer look, and from this on my interest started to grow.
I wasn't surprised when one day in my postbox I got a copy of the CX report. Now, I knew many of the people that had been involved. I knew many of the people that they had interviewed in those earlier days. So I simply went back on the tracks. Again, complete close down from the South African government side. It leaves one to speculate really rather cynically. You say either the Afrikaners and the ANC did a deal which said, you don't dig in our affairs and we'll help you on your way. Now, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that.
No South African media organisation has followed this story as doggedly as the specialist magazine Newsweek. The editor, Martin Wells, is one of the nation's top investigative journalists. People who know anything at all about the story found their information in his publication.
I actually read about it, I think, in Newsweek in 99 and 2000 already. Whenever the first Noseweeks a friend of mine in Houtbe informed me about Noseweek, which I didn't know at the beginning because he had it always divided the CNA under the shelf more or less. And finally I put my real puzzle together when I got sent the CD without an address, coming a CD from South Africa with a SAIX report on it, and then revealing a lot of the missing links I had, which I didn't put together before because I didn't understand what is going on.
German investor Michael Doe, who's also a shareholder of the South African Reserve Bank, has since made it his business to understand. Carefully chosen people were sent a secret report prepared for the government by a decorated former British spy who's twice been honoured by the Queen. The report outlines an ambitious plan to recover about 30 billion rand stolen by the former government, and it includes the so-called Absa lifeboat. This recovery plan is called Project Spear. The Project Spear top secret report says 3.2 billion rand went to Trust Bank and Bancorp, later Absa. Up to 6 billion was a gift to Sanlam and Rembrandt. About 5.5 billion rand went to the foreign company Aerospatiale Daimler Chrysler, later implicated in the arms deal. But most importantly, the report outlines a plan for recovery. A plan that the new government embraces, but things go wrong.
I'm hopeful that even our government has learned that covering up only compounds the problems. This was the lesson of Watergate. The cover-up was worse than the original crime, and it's about time they learned that lesson.
But cover-up is still the order of the day, we find. The current government receives a report called Project Spear from a British consultant who provides intelligence to governments and who specializes in international fraud. It outlines how stolen loot of 30 billion rand can be recovered. The government signs a deal. But nobody will tell us why South Africa later walks away from this agreement. In search of answers to this inexplicable turn of events, we find ourselves in strange places. Our journey in search of Project Spear, the extraordinary story of how the government is turning its back on 30 billion rand of your money, has taken some unexpected twists. So I wasn't surprised when the trail led here to the Franschhoek Literary Festival. Key players in our story are gathered here to tackle issues of corruption head-on.
We said poverty is the priority. We must put every cent we can into education, health, job creation, housing. And because we have, thankfully no one's about to attack us, we have at least a 15-year window. This is our priority. The threat to our democracy is 15 Ks, 20 Ks down the road.
Activist Terry Crawford Brown, a former banker, has bankrupted himself fighting corruption in South Africa. Today he's launching his second book in a trilogy dealing with this issue. He links the Project Spear story to a much bigger problem.
After 18 years, people are saying, hey, where's the transition? Where's the democracy? And then it was ANC intelligence operatives who came to me in June 1999, and I dedicate the book to Becky Jacobs, who was really the lead whistleblower on this, worked with Thabo Mbeki on, and then had a fallout with Thabo Mbeki over the arms deal. But he said, this is not why he'd seen what happened in Russia when communists became super capitalists, and the corruption and the gangsterism, etc. And he said, that's not what the struggle was about.
We struggle to get a response from government to these critical issues. But there's feverish anti-corruption activity at grassroots level. Close by, at the same literary festival, Noseweek editor Martin Wells and a group of journalists are addressing a similar forum. Again, the lone ANC whistleblower, the late Becky Jacobs, features.
A Moscow-trained ANC spy called Becky Jacobs and he came back from fighting the revolution in exile and training ANC spies and what have you, came back as an idealist. He said the contest in the ANC is not ideological. It's power which gives access to goodies. Yeah. It's who's after the goodies and who gets there first. That's really what it's about.
Investigative journalist Martin Wells says if we want to get to the bottom of the Project Spear mystery, it's all about asking the right questions of the South African Reserve Bank.
For instance, Mr. Durr, the shareholder is now causing so much grief. He is, in his life experience, a banker. He understands how banks work, he understands what their accounts look like, what they should be accounting for, so he asks the right questions. And what is really disturbing is that he's not getting the answers. That's the frightening bit, because of course what must you conclude when a bank hesitates giving you an audit certificate for its gold reserves? Then obviously you've asked, the guys have stolen it or they've squandered it? Or what's wrong? What's wrong? Why can't they tell us?
The Martin Wells news magazine Noseweek often tells us exactly what's wrong, but it's read by a select few. He's been covering the lifeboat saga since the tollgate scandal decades ago, when a British investor, Julian Askin, fled South Africa after a deal went sour. It's because of a very angry Julian Askin that Michael Oatley and SciEx became involved in South Africa's corrupt business world.
Julian Askin had hired a very senior British investigator or investigations company called CX. And one of the directors was a former intelligence agent in the British intelligence service called Michael Oatley. He'd achieved some fame. The culmination of his career really entailed persuading both the British government and the Irish Republican Army to make peace.
Oh, well, I decided to contact Oatley because it seemed to me that if this was a genuine document, it was necessary to follow up. Well, I came away thinking that he was a little bit more than peeved that he had been deprived of the opportunity to open up the can of worms of apartheid-era wrongdoing by the cancellation of his contract by the new South African authorities. That seemed to me to be what was motivating him to put his report out into the public domain.
CX had accumulated enough leads. They were reporting to the South African Intelligence Service. They briefed the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. They consulted with a deputy governor of the Bank of England on whether what the South African Reserve Bank had done was acceptable practice or not, and the answer was definitely not. After a year, this intelligence service said no, their money had run out, they didn't want to pay any more. So then CX apparently told them, well, tell you what, if your money's run out, we are so hot on the track now, and the amounts of money that stand to be recovered are so big, we'll do it on contingency. We'll do it on spec. We will continue the investigation. We will report to you, and whatever is recovered, we will get our fee out of the recovery, I don't know, 10%. But by then they were talking about billions and billions. They were going to make on 10% a lot of money. But by the same token, the South African government and the South African Reserve Bank were going to make phenomenal sums of money.
Looking at a total rand value of about 3 billion rand, if that amount of money was to be repaid now to the Reserve Bank, just using the Reserve Bank's the interest rate, it's probably about 30 billion rand, which is a massive amount of money, and would be a massive cash injection in terms of public procurement, and again in our ability to ensure that we have better hospitals, potentially have better schools, certainly have better roads.
Along the road digging into this story, we keep running into the ex-MI6 spy who offered to show us where the loot is hidden. But who exactly is Michael Oatley, and why were we putting our faith in him in the first place?
Michael Oatley is very clever, very charming, interesting, entertaining, person, no doubt a great spy he must have been in his day. Today he's a great guy to know. I think he is interested in the public service element of what he did, that the South African government, the South African public should recover the assets that they're due, the money that's due to them. At the same time, he had a deal. He was going to get his cut, his 10% cut, or whatever it is. I'm not sure, but I believe it's about 10%. What's wrong with that?
I think he also has a sense of the difference between right and wrong, and he believes that wrong was done. Whether he's right or not is not for me to say. There's talk of a apartheid era a cabinet minister running away to the United States with suitcases stuffed full of hard currency and more to follow, sort of cloak and dagger stuff.
CX by then had so much information on South Africa and the Reserve Bank that they started expanding their knowledge on that, and they started talking to some of the witnesses in greater depth. And they found arms corps agents who'd operated in Europe. They identified the European banks who'd helped front for the South African government, contrary to all the United Nations sanctions regulations, which made all those transactions illegal and therefore the money recoverable.
So why not go for recovery? Why would a government that's struggling to house its citizens, struggling to collect taxes, refuse all this money? Some of it in illegal bank accounts in Europe and elsewhere. Henny van Vieren of the Institute for Security Studies has a vital key to the mystery. He's also co-author of a definitive book on the arms deal called The Devil in the Detail.
There's a relatively small group of people that benefited outrageously. They made money that they couldn't make at that stage probably in just about anywhere else in the world out of a corrupt system, a brutal system that was being judged by the world. And they needed to find a way to be able to retain that money and influence. And I think that for some of those people it was perhaps coming clean, and for many of those people it was a sense of co-opting members of the new elite. And that co-option I don't think was necessarily just payment of bribes. It was a co-option by bringing people into the business sector, by giving people shares in companies. Some have argued that it was a system of laundering that money. You can keep some of it as long as you give some of it away.
Martin Wells has yet another take on the Reserve Bank's refusal to go after 30 billion rand of your money. He recalls an odd meeting with a former Minister of Finance.
So I had a lunchtime meeting with Trevor Manuel, and in retrospect I now see how important it was. Trevor Manuel wasn't in the least bit interested in what had gone wrong at the Reserve Bank and what. He wanted to know from me what techniques, what were the schemes that the Afrikaners used to plunder the public purse? How did they manage to direct public money into party funds? That's what he wanted to know from me.
In an effort to know, peace activist Terry Crawford Brown goes even further. He makes a direct link with a notorious arms deal.
Could you tell me a little bit about
Terry and the media have been the main forces that have brought about the Seriti Commission of Inquiry into the deal.
One of the things that comes out of the arms deal is that we've got to look into why Barclays Bank was allowed to take over Absa and why Absa hasn't been obliged to pay those loans back. Now Barclays Bank is the bank that is funding the BAE warplane contracts. And so huge questions arise about those loan agreements. The Constitution requires that the Reserve Bank acts without fear or favor. And so they're in not pressing for that. They're giving favoritism to Absa, or in fact to Barclays Bank.
The Reserve Bank shareholder economist Michael Durr, who has worked at both Goldman Sachs and Barings Bank, has the most compelling argument for our government's attitude of let sleeping dogs lie.
The Reserve Bank is not there for the good of the country and for the good of the government. They are there, and that's the reason why they defend their independence so fiercely. They're actually the ones who look after the interest of the commercial banks, and they're the ones who are actually ripping off the citizens. And that's the reason why I'm fighting the case, because I'm so convinced that we only can We only can solve the problems we have worldwide when we get the system right.
Following Project Spear, the story of grand theft in the dying days of apartheid has taken us across the country. In search of answers to the riddle of the government refusing to recover this money, we were invited to a secret meeting late one night at OR Tambo Airport. A shocking story emerges as Michael Durr, the shareholder who's been raising hell, is briefed by Musa Mbele, a former Reserve Bank executive. Mbele claims he was sacked after uncovering corruption at our central bank. The Reserve Bank is the organ of state that's ultimately responsible for recovering the stolen money.
Because all banknotes must be made to be the same. Otherwise, once banknotes are not the same, you're opening a gap for the counterfeiters. When it gets back to the central bank for sorting, it gets shredded.
Okay.
It is never allowed. And this is why it's called soiling and whatever. But you cannot, I as an MD or whoever, will never allow a banknote with a dot like that to go to the public.
But the sorting machine needs to understand now the difference between these three different 100 Rand notes. The very old series, Stahls, Bowini and Marcos. That means they need to understand that this one doesn't have the 100 here at the bottom.
Yes.
Doesn't have the...
It doesn't have the electrolyte watermark. It doesn't have a broad security thread. This is 4 millimeter, that is 2 millimeter. Every time this thing goes back now for sorting, this thing gets shredded.
Musa Mbele used to be the managing director of the South African Banknote Company, a subsidiary of the Reserve Bank. With Michael Durr, he goes through a long list of serious problems, including faulty notes at the central bank.
Most of it will be 100 Rand notes.
As an investor, Durr is amassing evidence for a case he's building that will be taken to the World Bank.
If I can get hold of the Stephen, and when he can give me the details from the Crane guy in America, then I try to contact them.
First, Musa Mbele was suspended after uncovering alleged corruption. Then he was sacked. The Reserve Bank has since spent millions on lengthy legal procedures to defend their position.
I said to Michael, to quote what I said when I met him, is I feel like killing people because they have killed me. Especially that, I'm facing the state using state coffers and I have to face with my own money because I'm trying to defend my integrity.
The Reserve Bank claims that Musa Mbele was out of line when as MD of their banknote company, he had an altercation with a consultant called Gary Zulberg. Strangely, the consultant, brought on board by the Governor Joel Marcus, stayed on, and Mbele, who'd been at the bank for 12 years, was fired.
They said they are giving me special leave because I cannot work with Gary. And I did ask, and I said, where have you ever heard of that? Just because of that? And Gary is a consultant? And when has that ever been in my 12 years that I have been here? And then they said, well, that is instruction from above.
After talking with Mbele and Durr, it becomes clear that recovering the stolen money is way down on a list of priorities at a central bank where faulty banknotes made at great expense abroad are being shredded. A domestic company runs at a loss while money is printed in Sweden. Staff altercations end in costly legal procedures. Repeated requests to the bank for a response have been ignored. Meanwhile, the trade union giant NUMSA has called for nationalization. The president of the union is scathing in his criticism of how Governor Joel Marcus is handling the Project Spear debacle among the bank's other challenges.
I mean, there are many things that have happened under the watch of the current governor. She spoke some yesterday. That by saying that we're demanding the mandate of the Reserve Bank to change, we're soon going to demand other stupid things that she mentioned in their speech. I mean, they were really stupid. That she's saying very soon you're going to demand that we do this, we do this, we do this. Things that we've never said we're demanding.
I think I can leave it to the president of NUMSA. I mean, I think he said on record, she is and the whole thing is rubbish. And I don't have anything better to say because I think it's a very respected person, Cedric China. Nationalization of the Reserve Bank, I think, is only helping for the discussion that we need to look at this. We need to put the spotlight on, we need to get transparency in, and we need to get this whole skullduggery out which they do, the whole rip-off they do. And I really can say Cedric China is a good guy. I really like him, and his quote is actually very much in line with what I think.
In addition to calls for nationalization and disapproval of the governor of the Reserve Bank, the union boss takes time to engage about the crisis of the sacked executive Musa Mbele.
It's an issue that we've heard about it, and we have not received satisfactory responses from the bank. I mean, you can't always hide behind secret information of the state when serious allegations are made. I mean, there are serious allegations that are made about what kind of decisions have been taken there. I mean, recently there was a problem with the notes, and it's a serious problem. I don't know whether they go to journalists and say, don't write about this thing. I mean, Musa has gone to a number of journalists, even some so-called respected journalists. They have not run the story in a manner that I know Musa has told them.
The Reserve Bank is not helping the country and the citizens, it's helping the commercial banks to defend their own rights. And that's a thing which has to be made clear, because that is the devil.
And with all now that I'm even hearing is scary, I'm losing respect even for the leaders they are, if at all they see such things happening and there's no action taken.
It's not hard to find echoes of the dissatisfaction coming from sacked central bank executive Musa Mbele and economist Michael Durr. Another shareholder, Mario Pretorius, who's the chief executive at Telemasters in Pretoria, even doubts whether the gold reserves are still in South Africa.
I think I was in primary school, there was a picture in the history book, a little black and white picture, and said, this is the gold underneath Church Square in Pretoria in the Reserve Bank. And I'm very fascinated. I always wanted to see that gold. When I got the opportunity, I bought shares in the Reserve Bank. The governor 2 years ago said, she issues a document in accordance to international central bank practice that the gold is there. So without having seen it, I need to accept her word for it. But I would love to see it, maybe not touch it, but know it's there. There's 98 tons of it. That might be a pretty picture.
What is your gut feeling?
Whether it's there or not. Sometimes I dream that there's a little sticker on the wall saying IOU, it's included in Switzerland, but what do I know?
The Project Spear scandal, the story of how the Reserve Bank is failing to recover 30 billion rand stolen by the apartheid government, takes a turn for the worse when the public protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela, announces she doesn't have the resources to investigate the affair.
I decided not to take it primarily because I thought that it being too old, it would be very difficult to investigate it, because when we investigate, we need to be able to secure the investigation site. That means we should be able to still be able to get hold of documents, and should I use my powers in terms of search and seizure, there should still be a possibility that we could subpoena the computers, we could do a forensic on documents.
The man who gave the public protector the SAIG's documents and who lodged a formal complaint is Advocate Paul Hoffman SC, Director of the Institute for Accountability in Southern Africa. He's also the legal counsel for anti-corruption activist Terry Crawford Brown.
I got a letter from the Public Protector's Office saying that there is, in the legislation governing the Public Protector, there have to be exceptional circumstances to become involved in a complaint that is more than 2 years old. That is to stop the Public Protector being inundated with ancient, what do they say in Afrikaans, dead cows out of the sloot.
On a bus, during the conference, we were on a bus to one of the historical sites in Barcelona, and then we started talking about this. and then he presented his side of the story, and then later also then confirmed it in writing to say he thinks I was too fast to reject his complaint.
Then I met the public protector at a conference in Barcelona and happened to sit next to her on a bus, and we chatted about the refusal that she had given me, and I was able to persuade her in the course of the bus trip that there was merit in actually looking into it.
It wasn't a high-risk investigation as I originally thought. The factor that changed my mind during that conversation was the understanding that we really don't have to investigate the process through which the funds were taken and by who and how. We should just investigate what happened after the report. What should have happened, which is our story, is always what should the state have done when that happened.
But I'm not sure if for this kind of investigation they've got enough resources to go into it. I mean, you're talking about an investigation that must have powers to go into sovereign countries, to go into sovereign accounts in Luxembourg. I don't think that it has the capacity. It can have it can have the will to do the investigation, but to me it looks like a very sophisticated investigation.
The lifeboat saga took us on many twists and turns. Inevitably, the trail led here to the Absa mini-city in downtown Joburg. In his book, the late Bob Allworth calls this the infernal tower. He claimed that if you rose to the top of the Broederbond, that secret band of brothers that ran just about everything in the old South Africa, the kind of assistance given to Bangkok and later Absa came with the territory. The Reserve Bank handouts went in many directions. Most significant were the massive injections given to the ailing Bangkok group acquired by Absa in 1992. From his lofty position here at the Absa headquarters, we asked one of the chief executives, a guy nicknamed King Louis by his colleagues, what are the implications for South Africa's banking giant of the public protector's reopened investigation?
What is important is that if we go forward, that we cooperate with any party that does an investigation in this transaction, and because we are very comfortable, as per the findings of the Davis report, that nothing untoward was done, and the conclusion of that report was one to say, recommendations for the future might be greater transparency, making it known, but nothing that was done was actually faulted. And with that in mind, whoever would look into this matter further, we would absolutely cooperate.
Now, several investigations have been done into the Absa lifeboat saga. The one paid for by the Reserve Bank and conducted by Judge Dennis Davis has the official stamp of approval. But an inquiry conducted by former corruption buster Judge Willem Heath made a damning finding. Absa says they've done nothing wrong. But if it's all above board, why did the anti-corruption arbiter Judge Willem Heath say it was misappropriation, a fancy word for stealing? And why is the public protector investigating? Judge Heath disagrees that Absa should keep the illegal billions their predecessor was given in the old days.
Well, the finding was it was unauthorized. It was not of financial assistance as some of the parties pretended it to have been, and it was merely a donation, and therefore it was misappropriation of government money or Reserve Bank money.
Just in terms of your own set of values, do you think that Absa has anything to pay back to the Exchequer or to the Reserve Bank or to the people of South Africa?
I definitely don't think so, and the reason why I don't think so is that I think Absa paid for value in the price of Bancorp. And again, as we said earlier in the discussion, if Absa did not have the lifeboat as part of the Bancorp transaction, a much lesser amount, I guess, would have been paid.
But Judge Willem Heath disagrees, and we discover that it was even worse than merely doling out money to Broederbond buddies. The lifeboat frauds had a special twist.
Government bonds were given as security for the monies that were paid out. Now that doesn't make sense. If I make money available to you, I don't guarantee the repayment of that. So it made no sense whatsoever. And that, of course, confirmed the conclusions that we had arrived at.
Strangely, although the Heath finding was a damning indictment of Absa, the judge stopped short of ordering recovery of the money.
I consulted experts. It would have led to a total run on the bank of all the banks, the well-known banks of the national banks. And that would have destroyed our economy.
But Reserve Bank shareholder Michael Durr says no matter what Judge Heath says or the Public Protector's probe decides, his fight has only started. With the backing of a Canadian industrialist who specializes in third-party litigation, John Risley, he's taking his case to the World Bank. He says his rights as an investor have been infringed because Germany has a bilateral treaty with South Africa. Durr claims recent amendments to the Reserve Bank Act, the Project Spear debacle, and shocking corporate governance violate this treaty. He's determined to blow the bank's secret dealings wide open and is asking for damages to the tune of $100 million, almost R1 billion.
When we file this case, this exit case in Washington with the World Bank, then there will be demands for retrieval of information, which so far in Musa's case, he couldn't get a hold of it because they just nail him. But now when the American courts do it, America is, for me, not the country I want to live, but I mean, they're very helpful on the legal side because once you file something there, they're very tough. Now with the exit case, when we file the exit case and we demand for recovery of information in various fields for the case, then they have to service it. When they don't service it, then it means for Jill Marcus, for the whole board, for the whole Reserve Bank, nobody ever enters America anymore because the first thing they do when they enter American soil, they will be brought to some American judge who demands this information immediately and otherwise they get locked away. I mean, that's the American system which I learned, which is actually quite unique. That means they have to oblige to give all the information which we need and which we want for the case for international arbitration.
And when this arbitration at the World Bank is concluded a few years down the line, John Risley, the Canadian industrialist who's backing Michael Durr, plans to put his money into the Michael Oatley case to settle once and for all the question of why the government hired this former spy and then reneged on the Project Spear deal to recover our money. The South African government might have decided to let apartheid's sleeping dogs lie, but Michael Durr and his team are intent on letting them run rampant in a maze of international litigation. Is it the thought of making all that money that drives him?
I spoke to Dr. Ross, who is the superintendent, I think it's called, of the hospital. And I said to him, look, when I would get any money out of the Reserve Bank, whatever net proceeds come out of my shares, I would pledge it for the hospital because I don't want to be seen in connection that I make money out of it. And that one I put out in 2009 already, and Suma knew it, and then I put it out in 2010 again, in May, in June 2010 in parliamentary records, but nobody listens, and the media took its own spin, and then they slandered me in the media as being the nasty and greedy foreigner.
Real democracies exist in countries where there is equality. And in our country, instead of inequality going away, it is becoming bigger and bigger.
I think we've got to come clean with this as we've got to come clean with the arms deal, and trying to bury it and saying it happened so long ago doesn't wash. You know, if we don't deal with corruption, it'll simply fester and get bigger. We're seeing that as a consequence because the arms deal is now petty cash by comparison with some of the more recent escapades. And if government says it's serious about corruption, then it's got to deal with the arms deal, it's got to deal with the lifeboats. Otherwise it doesn't have any credibility.
Has there been any pressure on you to leave this alone?
No, not really.
Banks are powerful institutions. Major multinational corporations are powerful. But what I've had occasion to call it in the past, in the public worldwide, the hurtful factor is growing.
Our story of grand theft is just one instance of how South Africa's elite used corruption and co-option to build empires. But there's so much we haven't told you. We can't tell you about the members of the board of the Reserve Bank who are now enriched by money that belongs to you, who thrived in a climate of entitlement. Historic privilege that's so rampant, so entrenched, that repeated requests we send to the other entities mentioned in the SAIC's report have been ignored. Sanlam, Remgro, the modern incarnation of the Rupert family's Rembrandt Group, an arms score that diverted money into a network of foreign accounts are smug and silent. But we can tell you that the research by the SAIC's team continues. They've uncovered a scale of profiteering that makes our story pale by comparison. This team, working in utmost secrecy, aims to make this information available so that the South African people can pursue reparations, even if we have a government that's dragging its heels.
The lifeboat was not the first lifeboat extended by the central bank. That happened many a times in previous years.
When I started, I didn't want to do it. And not because I didn't want to dig into apartheid. It's just because I didn't want to ride a horse to nowhere at the time.
Being in Africa for 10 years made me a better German.
President Mandela appointed many people in different positions, but there's one position he didn't touch, the position of the Governor of the Reserve Bank.